11th of Heartfire, 4E201, Day 26. After eating and packing up the campsite, we turned back a brief distance and traveled into the woods to search for the stone wall I'd seen from outside Helgen. At the top of the hill, we found a ruined tower called South Skybound Watch. As we approached the tower, 3 glowing lights spun around us, seemingly curious about what we were doing, but they darted away as we entered the structure. Inside the tower, there was a heavy iron door leading to a passage. We decided to step into the passage for a while to warm up. It was like a tropical paradise inside. Warm and comforting, with trickling springs and even wild grapes. We could not resist spending a little time there to investigate. It comes as little surprise that we found bandits residing there. Is every ruin in Skyrim inhabited by these thugs? I picked grapes and tried to ignore the sounds of battle while Uthgerd and the dog took care of the situation. The stonework above our heads provided the perfect diversion as we walked, so I was able to avoid seeing the fallen bodies. The passage itself was fascinating to study. Carved out by the ancient people of this land and decorated with their metalwork. I had to follow it to its end to see what was on the other side. This proved more difficult than I expected, not because of bandits, but because of a giant frostbite spider. It was enormous, taking up the entire width of the passage. Uthgerd charged in, but she was quickly incapacitated by its venom. The dog nipped at its legs, and the 2 of them were enough to keep it distracted, while I pierced it with arrow after arrow. It spewed venom at me several times, but I was quick enough to dodge most of it. Still, by the time we killed it, we were all wounded. We spent a while resting up and eating to recover our strength, and then we proceeded further into the passage. As we neared the other side, I could tell by the upward slope of the passage, we had to clear out 2 more bandits. Well, I write we, but really it was one good swing from Uthgerd and a devious trap triggered by one of the bandits that did the work, on his own comrade. I steeled myself and walked quickly past the bodies towards the door. We reached the other side and opened the heavy iron door, only to hear the sounds of more fighting. There were steps leading to a landing above the door, which in turn led us into an ancient stone bunker. Inside, we discovered the bodies of several more bandits, and a lone mage sitting placidly at a table, eating bread. I tried to question the old man, but he just kept mumbling something about coming back when we were ready. Ready for what? We had no choice but to leave him. As we went back outside, I noticed a pedestal sitting on a stone buttress with an alcove to hold some sort of item. What could this be? It was an interesting puzzle, and I wondered if the mage knew anything about it. It was unfortunate that he would not converse with us. From our excursion, we learned that the ruined tower where we started with was South Skybound Watch. The landing where we ended was North Skybound Watch, and the passage joining the 2 is called Skybound Watch Pass. This must have been part of an ancient surveillance system, or perhaps a safe way to travel across the mountains? Since we'd left the horse on the other end, we had to travel back through the pass. When we exited the tower at South Skybound Watch, we were again greeted by the wisps, but this time they were not so benign. They began to attack us, and when we fought back, a glowing, ghostly female figure rose up from a burn. The wisps must have been connected with her in some way, because she screeched as they died and attacked us in a rage. It was harrowing. At one point, Uthgerd was knocked to the ground, and the ghost turned her full barrage of magic on me. I was pummeled with ice shards, ripping away my breath, and as my vision began to narrow, I barely managed to quaff some health potions in time. The dog ran up behind and got her attention, which gave me time to prepare my own barrage of flame magic. My sword seemed ineffectual, or perhaps I am just ineffectual with it, but between my flames and the dog's teeth, we defeated the ghost. Without a doubt, that dog saved my life. After recovering our senses, we headed back to the road and found a dirt trail to follow. It skirted around a large flat rock face called Orphan Rock and ultimately ended at North Skybound Watch. I took this as a sign. We stopped there for the night. The old mage didn't mind sharing his bunker. Uthgerd and I tried on some nice armor, clean enough to appear unused, that we found in a chest hidden in the woods. I've come around to the Skyrim way of thinking. Finders, keepers. As I've said before, one can't afford to pass up anything of potential use in this harsh environment. 12th of Heartfire, 4E201, Day 27. I slept fitfully last night. I have vague memories of strange and disturbing visions from my dreams. Ghosts in the darkness, men with monstrous faces, a river of blood washing me away, screams echoing down a narrow passage. Once again, I was grateful for the arrival of dawn. We packed up camp and then traveled back down the path from North Skybound Watch to head east along the road. We passed a Stormcloak camp, the Falkreath encampment, and their blacksmith was happy to exchange his steel arrows for some of my extra gear. The road continued through a narrow, snowy path between the mountains. Partway down the path, we came upon a site called Hamar's Shame. Given its interesting name, I suggested we stop and investigate. We entered the dark passage, which led to Hamar's cavern. When we first entered, the only thing I saw was a young woman dressed in a fancy lacy dress. I could not fathom what such a pretty young lady was doing out here in a dark cavern all alone. Then she turned, and I saw that her eyes glowed with an unholy light. She snarled and bared her teeth. Beauty turned to monstrosity, and all semblance of humanity faded away before me. She was a vampire. Uthgerd was unfazed and charged in with her sword drawn. I stood still, gaping in disbelief. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I began to notice bloody remains strewn about the cavern. I could smell blood and rotten flesh. Shock and disgust rolled over me in waves, and I barely managed to keep my breakfast down. These monsters had been feeding upon unwary travelers, feeding and practicing ungodly rituals with their bodies. I looked up as Uthgerd shouted a war cry and was glad to see her deliver a killing blow to the vile creature. Uthgerd seemed particularly zealous to put the remaining vampires down. At her urging, we cleared the entire cavern. Once I realized that they didn't bleed, it was even easier to see them as simply monsters that needed to be purged. I lent my fire and sword to the cause with enthusiasm. We followed a path leading to a second underground area, Hamar's Shame. Here we encountered the Coven's master vampire and almost met our doom. I could not seem to damage him, even with my flames. I could feel myself growing weaker as he began sucking the life right out of me. With no obvious way to defeat him, I sought escape. I turned and ran as fast as I could towards the entrance of the cavern, and the vampire followed. Uthgerd and Hero, I've named the dog, ran after the both of us. They finally cornered him, and it only took a few swings from Uthgerd's sword to fell him. She looked at me with one eyebrow raised, and I turned away. I'm sure she thinks I am weak and cowardly. She is right, and I am ashamed. With the threat over, we retraced our steps back to the bottom of the cavern. There we found a large statue of a man dressed in ragged robes, with one hand stroking an enormous dog and the other holding up a horned mask. I do not know who it depicts, and neither does Uthgerd. We exited the cavern through an opening behind the statue. Fortunately, it put us close to the original entrance of the cave. We made our way down the mountain and continued along the road. I took a few side trips to scout the mountains, mine some ore, and avoid Uthgerd's gaze. As evening started to fall, so did the rain. We spotted a cabin in the woods and made for it as fast as we could. It would have been wonderful to camp out in the cabin. Unfortunately, there was already a squatter there. His name was Godrog the Hammer, and he was clearly out of his mind. The old man claimed that Ulfric Stormcloak was Talos. Not Talos reborn, but Talos himself, come out of hiding after centuries. Since he had taken over the single bed in the tiny cabin, Uthgerd and I put up our tent outside. With the heavy rain, we couldn't make a fire. Luckily, the air was warm enough for us to survive without it. "13th of Heartfire, 4E201, day 28. Rain all day long. We couldn't even consider packing up to travel. I spent the day studying a spell book I picked up way back in Helgen. The only good part of today is that I have now learned how to cast a shock spell. It's weak, but I've got the basics down. Tonight, for the second night in a row, I felt a strange thirsting as the sun went down. I had a vision of quenching my thirst with Uthgerd's blood. A flash, and it was gone, but horrifying nonetheless. Uthgerd noticed that I was pale and immediately started asking me questions about how I felt. She strongly suspects that I contracted sanguine vampiris from the vampires. If I don't get a cure within the next 24 hours, she tells me that I'm going to turn into a vampire myself. I hardly know what to write. My hands are shaking as I pen these words of doom. Later that evening, praise the divines! According to a journal by the bed, the shack belongs to an alchemist. Uthgerd suggested that we raid his stores and use whatever ingredients we could find to try crafting a potion to cure me. I frantically mixed ingredients together for hours, praying to the gods for some good fortune. I was running out of ingredients and hope when finally I hit upon the right mix: mud crab chitin and vampire dust. Who would have thought that the very creatures responsible for my condition would also have a hand in curing it? "14th of Heartfire, 4E201, day 29. Awoke to continuing rain. Our water skins are empty, and I don't have anything to collect the rain. Water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. We are also running out of food. I need a fire to use my cookpot, but we can't get the wood to light in this downpour. We may have to forge ahead through the rain and hope that there is a village nearby. The only bright spot is that I am feeling much better. The cure seems to have worked. After a soggy breakfast of damp bread, we packed up and rode east in hopes of finding a village before nightfall. Luck was with us, and we reached a small town called Iverstead in time for lunch. It isn't really a town. There's only an inn, a mill, and one farm. The villagers are an interesting folk. Most of them assume that I'm here to take a pilgrimage up the mountain to a place called High Hrothgar. It seems that a group of monks, the Greybeards, live in seclusion at the very top of the mountain. The path is dubbed the 7,000 Steps, though I found a book which refutes the claim. I'm halfway curious to make the journey and count it for myself. Uthgerd and I wandered around the village, speaking to the locals. The mill owner, an irritable woman named Temba Widearm, went on a tirade about bears ruining the trees and making her work difficult. She said she'd pay me for bringing her 10 bear pelts. I'll start collecting. At the farmhouse, we met Bodhi and her husband, Jofthor. Seems that their daughter, Fastred, is a bit of a dreamer and wants to leave Ivarstead. Jofthor has forbidden it. In fact, he has even forbidden her from speaking to travelers. Maybe he thinks he's being a good father and protecting her, but I think he's going to drive her away with that sort of behavior. I spent about an hour with them this morning, helping in the field to earn a little coin. Bodhi let me take a few vegetables and chicken eggs as well. There is an ancient stone barrow on the hill here above town. I overheard the innkeeper telling his barmaid to stay away from it because it's haunted by a ghost. Uthgerd and I had nothing better to do with this rainy day, so we decided to have a look. The place was definitely creepy, but it turns out the ghost was very mortal indeed. A treasure hunter named Wendelius Gatharion had holed himself up in the barrow and was using a special potion to make himself appear spectral and scare away the villagers. He attacked us without any warning. Uthgerd and Hero took care of him before I even got my spells charged up. He had been keeping a journal, and it's clear from the degenerating entries that he was losing his mind. His original intent was to find a supposed treasure hidden within the barrow. To find it, he needed some sort of claw. He did not give any detail about what the claw is or what it's used for, but it was apparently integral to his quest. I took the journal so I could give it to the innkeeper, Wilhelm, to allay his fears. Before leaving the barrow, we investigated a little farther. Skirting a few traps, we found a chest with some potions and a chamber with walls covered in ancient Nordic carvings. In the glyphs, it appeared that various beasts, including moths, wolves, and eagles, were being revered in worship. At the far end of the chamber was a large door. It had 3 concentric rings around a central keyhole. Each ring had metal badges inset into the stone that depicted different animals, similar to those in the carvings on the walls, and the rings could be spun to reveal each different animal. The keyhole certainly did not look like any keyhole I've ever seen. It had a carving in a claw-like shape with 3 small holes in an arc above it. I wonder if this has anything to do with the claw that Wendelius was searching for. Uthgerd is speculating that the chamber is one of the fabled halls of stories that she has heard mention of, and that the door is something called a Nordic puzzle door. She doesn't know anything more. Perhaps Wilhelm will have more light to shed on this tomorrow. Tonight, I just want a warm dinner and soft bed.